Hi, guys. Welcome to the first episode of Model Behavior. My name's Macy, and I am really excited to be recording this today. Just want to use this space as a place where I can kind of share ideas and start a discussion about certain things. And today, I wanted to talk a little bit about what I've been up to and just give you a little bit more about me. So, I live in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I'm a research scientist. And I also model. I have a modeling contract with Wilhelmina. And then I do have a third job. I am an adjunct professor for a school up in Montana. So I go in the summers and I teach a field course, which is super fun. But that's what I do for a living. And then in my free time, I'm all about skiing and being outdoors, hiking, backpacking, fly fishing, all of the classic born and raised in Montana stuff, because that's also where I'm from. And also, I really enjoy working out and being active. I'm doing a workout probably 6 days a week, sometimes 7. And obviously, I'm resting also, but that's really enjoyable for me. So I was thinking about a story that happened last weekend. And I kind of wanted to share the story with you because I want to talk about this idea of having main character energy. Just a little bit of backstory. It is the middle of February here in Colorado, and it has been so cold. I know it's been cold like most places like recently, but it's just been so cold. So I've lived here for 2 years. Literally, it was exactly 2 years last month. And so I moved in the middle of winter when I first moved here, and it was cold, but it wasn't bad. If you live in Colorado, you know, especially along the Front Range, it can be really cold, but then it warms right up and all the snow melts and then it gets cold again. But you have these like warm periods and also lots of sun. And that is not how this winter has been. It's been very, very snowy, which is great for the skiing, but it's not great for my mental health. So I've actually been experiencing what I call the winter. What is it? Well, people call it the winter uglies. I didn't invent that, but I've been experiencing the winter uglies so bad. But for me, the winter uglies also involves a little bit of seasonal depression. So I've really been trying to be intentional lately about making moments fun and making every day kind of an adventure. That sounds lame, but you'll see what I mean. And I want to set an example of something that happened last weekend. So I have really been trying to make plans on the weekends. And I went to this event last weekend and it was so fun. Oh my gosh. It was just this amazing party. It was Shrek themed. So me and my friends dressed up as the three blind mice. I know, basic, but it honestly was really good. And I had the cutest costume. And my friend told me, she was like, you have to tell people I'm a mouse, duh. And that's kind of along the lines of what it was, but it was just, I felt so cute. And the decorations at this party were literally amazing. And it was so fun. And so there was a DJ, and just everybody was dancing. Everybody was having such a fun time. And because I was feeling myself in this outfit last weekend, you know, I had to snap a little mirror pic, and then I tagged the venue that this party was at. And the venue reposted it on their Instagram. Okay. And so then we get to the party. We're having a really fun time. And I went to this party last year. It's an event that they put on every year. And I just remember having so much fun. And so this year I was totally determined to just stay pretty much glued to the dance floor. So I was with my friends, but then they would leave and they would get more drinks or, you know, talk to some of our other friends that were there. And then they would come back. But I was just like sat in the middle of this dance floor. And I want to paint the picture of kind of how big of a party this was. There were probably about 500 people there. Like, it was a lot. And the dance floor was absolutely packed. This room was huge. The Shrek theme was so cute. So they had normally, like last year, they had just like some disco balls hanging from the ceiling. But this year, they made a giant gingerbread man, like the one from Shrek 2. And instead of gumdrop buttons, he had disco balls. And I thought it was so cute and it was so fun. He was like spinning and the music was really good. So this year DJing, there were a couple of guys and they were doing more like trap type beats, but the drops were really good. So everybody was feeling it. And then they were switching off with this other DJ. I think her name is Aubrey, but she DJ'd last year and it was literally amazing. She's amazing. And she's a lot more like mainstream house music mixing with like popular songs. And I'm just obsessed with her. I love her. But she was rotating with these two guys. So I'm just feeling myself all night, okay? I was living my main character dream, and I really think, and I want to talk about this more, I really think when you walk into a room with confidence, people see that and they like are attracted to that. And I think when you truly are confident and you're coming off as like friendly, you can make a lot of friends that way. So I was actually, even though my friends that I came with were kind of in and out, I was fully like making friends with people on the dance floor. We were just having so much fun. And at one point, I see one of the DJs kind of like waving his phone around. And I was like, what the heck? Because I was near the front, okay? Like I had pushed myself up there because I wanted to be where the action was at. But also, I was like probably 4 rows back. And so this DJ was like waving his phone around and I was like, what the heck? And at one point I turned around and I finally saw him and he was like yelling at me, but you couldn't hear it because it was like mid-set. And I looked at his phone and he was literally showing me a picture of my Instagram story of my little costume that I was wearing. And he was like mouthing, "Is this you? Is this you?" And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's me. And then like me and my new friends, we were all like, haha, so funny. And so then mid-set, this guy is like sending me DMs and I thought it was so funny. Obviously, I looked at his Instagram and he's like very much giving freshman, sophomore in college vibes. And I was like, okay, yeah, no. But I did feel like the main character in that moment. And so that really got me thinking about ways that I help myself get through the winter uglies and kind of bring more of that main character energy. So in this podcast, I know this is the first episode, but I am really wanting to use this as a space where we can kind of open up conversations about not only being like a young professional, but also just being single in your late 20s, early 30s, and kind of what that looks like in different phases of life, female friendships, dating, all of those topics. And I'm really excited to talk with you guys about that. So when you define main character energy, what does that actually mean? And I think that definition kind of differs depending on who you ask. Some people say, oh, is it about confidence? Other people say, is it a little delusion? And obviously I'm saying that it's a little bit of both, okay? But I do truly think that this is not harming anybody by kind of like making up a plot in your head, okay? Like this is something that can only help you. And I do really believe in faking it until you make it. But also I think that there's a way to do it really humbly, to where people aren't like, oh, like, okay. And most of that comes from like being confident, but also being friendly, because I think that is a huge part of confidence, and making people feel seen. So that's my definition. And I definitely think there is a little delusion sprinkled in there because like, come on, like what happened last weekend, not that big of a deal. But in my head, I was like, yes, this would happen. No, I'm just kidding. That's literally never happened to me before. But you kind of have to have that thought in your head of like, yeah, I know it. So when I think of main character energy, there's like an example of good main character energy and like bad main character energy. And I think like when comparing characters that we know, we could really talk about Elle Woods as embodying main character energy, because like bad things will happen to her and she will just find a way to like make it a story or make some sort of plot out of it. And no matter what, like she always has this mindset of like, I am living my best life and no matter what comes at me, I'm just going to make it into a plot, you know? Another character I've been thinking about a lot because they did just put Gossip Girl back on Netflix is Blair Waldorf. And now I know we all know that Blair Waldorf is an extremely complicated character, but I also think she is a prime example, whether in a good or bad way, of making your own narrative as far as where you're at. Like, I'm really thinking about when she started that episode where she started at NYU and she was like trying to build an army of minions because she was like, ugh, I feel so out of place. I'm not saying that we should go and do that, but I do think she definitely embodies that main character energy in that when she walks into a room, like, people look, and I think this is not about looks, but I do think it's a lot about the way that you present yourself, having good posture, having good personal style, whatever that means to you, being friendly to people, making eye contact, not being on your phone. And those are all things that I've really been trying to work on, especially the last few months, and especially the last month as the winter uglies have really, really set in. So that is kind of that's kind of the idea that I'm thinking of. But it also got me thinking about the science of attention. So this is something that I know has been really well studied. Obviously, I'm a research scientist. I'm a microbiologist. So I have my PhD in I don't have my PhD in gut microbiology. I have my PhD in microbial ecology, and I study gut microbiology. So things like probiotics, disease, and something I'm also looking at is the difference in gut microbiome between males and females, which is super interesting, but I'm getting off track and I cannot start down that road. So the science of attention, though, is something that has been really well studied in social psychology. There's this question of why we are drawn to main character types. There's a lot of schools of thought on the psychology of charisma, of body language, and energy. And I was actually at a Valentine's Day brunch last weekend, and I was talking to some girls, and one of my friends was like, yeah, she's always bringing up studies that she's read. And one of the other girls at the table was like, yeah, she's already brought up like 3 already. And I was like, I don't realize I do that. So I'm trying not to do that in this episode specifically because I don't have like specific stats in front of me. And girl, I want to cite my sources. But I have read a lot about the psychology and what we know about body language. Okay, I lied about the not bringing statistics thing. I just could not do it. So I had to take a little break and look up a little bit of what I was reading and come back with the receipts, okay? So there's a lot that on this that you've probably heard before, but something that I read that I thought was really interesting is that within 1 second, people form a first impression of attractiveness, trustworthiness, and dominance. And I remember reading that and thinking, like, how can people make those assumptions? But I do think about that because then I started noticing when I walked into a room, whether that was like a Pilates class or a lecture or a modeling casting, I could pick out people that I'm like, oh, like, she looks cool. And it's like, okay, well, what about her makes her look cool? And I think that that's the beauty of approaching this as kind of a science is like, I truly believe that you can study whatever you want and you can make observations and adapt those observations to your life. So I didn't get into this that much, but growing up, I've always been a very chatty person. I'm very outgoing, but obviously, as most of us were, I was bullied pretty badly in middle school and high school. And a lot of that was because I was the girl that was in all the sports, all the activities, and I was also really smart. I'm really smart, you guys. I didn't mean that, but I don't mean it like that. But I was always the person that would like finish my schoolwork very quickly, and school was pretty easy for me. And I also, especially when it came to science projects, girl, I would go balls to the wall with my science projects, okay? I was so into it. And obviously, look at where we are now. I have a PhD in microbiology. Like, let's go. So it paid off. But anyways, from that, and I think everybody has this experience, and I know this. Again, I cannot come up with the stats on the top of my head, but I did read a study looking at how women's confidence or girls' confidence is affected as they grow older, because it has a lot to do with whether or not they choose careers that are more mentally stimulating, whether that's in the arts or STEM or anything like that, or, any other industry. So anyways, for my story is very similar to where I became extremely introverted when I was in middle school and high school because I just felt like everything I did got made fun of. And it wasn't everything, but I will say, like, there were a couple of girls that really had it out for me. And, like, I'm not saying boo-hoo because comparatively, my experience was not near as bad as it is for a lot of girls, but it was something that really influenced my personality. And so from that is where I first started really thinking about, okay, what are the girls around me that are successful socially doing, and how can I emulate that? And not even girls. I remember there was this one guy in high school. Well, he moved to town. I grew up in a really small town in Montana. He moved to town when we were maybe in like late elementary school or middle school. And he was just the kind of guy that everybody was friends with. Like everybody liked him. All the girls wanted to go to prom with him. And he wasn't particularly he played sports, but he wasn't like the biggest or the most athletic or the most attractive guy. And he did well in school, but I was just like, what is it about this guy that makes everybody want to be his friend? And so I really just watched him in like a creepy way. Like this is fully a scientist in the making, okay? But not in a creepy way, I promise. But I did learn like certain like social things that he did. And I was like, okay, I can definitely do that. And obviously dealing with mean girls in middle school and high school, you cannot, like, do not try to win them over. They are just insecure about themselves, and it has nothing to do with you and everything to do with them. Obviously, try explaining that to a 13-year-old. But anyways, so that is tough. But I did take a lot of those things and I'm like, wait, I can just study what other people are doing that I admire and do that myself, and I can totally copy them. And that was really fun. Particularly like with social things. And that's why I'm like, whenever I see another girl copying me, it is the biggest, I don't know. It's like the biggest compliment to me. And I'm not saying like copying me in like a bad way, because who's to say that they picked that up from me? But sometimes girls will be like, oh, you did this or you wore this and I wanted that, so I went and bought that because you look so good in it. And I just think that is like the highest form of a compliment. Obviously, imitation is, I can't remember that phrase. But anyways, so that's kind of where my journey with becoming the main character started. And then as I got older, dealing with, mental health issues, or like definitely seasonal depression hits me hard in the winter, thinking of ways that I can make life more exciting and make just little psychological tactics to help elevate my mood and, make me feel good have just been so useful. So back to that statistic, within 1 second, people form a first impression of attractiveness, trustworthiness, and dominance. And that's from a study that came out in 2006. A lot of this research is from like the late 90s, early 2000s, which I find interesting because I'm like, that really corresponds with Sex in the City. But also I do think it's interesting with research how there's ebbs and flows in topics that we're interested in and that are getting funded. So I just found that this was interesting. Another statistic is that similarity wins. So couples with similar values, personalities, and interests have a higher relationship satisfaction. And I have been knowing about this, okay? Like I have a joke with my friends, I think they're like my high school friends, or maybe they're my college friends. Anyways, some of my girlfriends that we always play this game of couples that look like siblings. And so whenever we see a couple that looks like siblings, we'll like tell each other about it. But there's like a real psychology behind this. And a lot of this is to do with the fact of familiarity. Like we are attracted to what we are familiar with. So obviously you can't like have the exact same values or interests as everybody. But if you're in a social situation where you're trying to embody that main character energy, I think a really easier way to, kind of fake this similarity, not that you're faking it at all, but like emulate, that's the word I was looking for. Emulate this similarity is by expressing interest in things that those other people are interested in. And I think that maybe this is just like something I learned from like my teaching certification when I was finishing grad school, but definitely asking questions about, which I know sounds so basic, but if you think about it, when you're in a social situation with a bunch of girls that don't know each other, or guys, but I'm more talking about girls that don't know each other, it can be really easy to just, talk about yourself because you're trying to say like, oh, like I'm worthy of being here, blah, blah, blah. But the thing that will make you the most interesting person in the room is if you act the most interested. Okay. And this is something that I live by. So if you want to be the most interesting person in the room, be the most interested. So that can kind of play on the statistics of similar values and personalities, not just with relationships, as the statistic says, but also with female friendships. I think it can be really valuable expressing interest in other people's interests. And then you also get to know them really well, and you get to know, what excites them and bring up interesting topics. And let's say that you have nothing in common with them. You could say like, oh, I have no background in, I don't know, mountaineering. That's like a hyperfixation I have, not of doing, but learning about. It's so scary. But can you tell me more about like, what's it like? I was at a party, I think this was like a few weeks ago, with one of my friends. Oh, no, it wasn't. It was a New Year's party. So this was fully like a month and a half ago. But I didn't know anybody at this party. And like, I'm going to get into this, but I think that there's such power in not knowing anybody in a room. And so I was like, you know what? This is my chance. This is where I shine. And that's what I tell myself, whether or not it's true. I'm like, I shine in these situations. And I got into a really good conversation with a guy who's a flight attendant. First of all, I think that flight attendants live very interesting lives. Like, they have the craziest stories. They get to go visit the coolest places. And so I obviously know nothing about being a flight attendant, but I asked him so many questions and I learned so much. And then I was on a flight a couple weeks ago and I was like using some of the tips he gave me to like, befriend the flight attendants. And it was so fun. So the third main statistic that I wanted to talk about before we can kind of break this down a little bit more is that confidence beats looks. So in a study that came out in 2002, they found that self-confidence is rated as the number one non-physical trait that makes someone more attractive. And I think about this a lot, and I really started thinking about this when I started modeling. And I can do a whole episode on my modeling journey, how I got into modeling, because it's kind of a crazy story, very very unconventional. But it was really cool being in these spaces that were so different from like what I was used to, being a scientist and doing academic research, being in graduate school. So, I can say, because here's the thing is like, it's cool when you go to castings because a lot of these people are used to being like the hottest person, right? Like if you grew up in a small town or really not even that small of a town, you're used to being the hottest person. But in modeling, you walk into a room with a casting, and let's say there can be like hundreds of other girls there, but normally for the ones that I do, it's usually like staggered audition times, not audition, but casting times. And so, but you walk into a room with like 50 other girls and they are all hot, okay? And like in very different ways, just some of the most beautiful people you've ever seen in your life. And I remember when I first started going to castings, I was blown away, okay? I was like, these girls are the most beautiful humans I've ever seen in my entire life. But what sets you apart in a room like that, okay? Confidence. And even if you aren't the most conventionally attractive person, or let's say like right now, I had my period last week and for some reason I'm like breaking out so bad still. And I'm like, I really don't want to be breaking out right now. But I know that if I project confidence, like people are not going to be like looking at my zits, right? Like it's about the way that you present yourself and the vibe you give off, the aura you give off. And obviously we know this, but this is like a well-studied thing. So, okay, I lied about the stats. There are a couple biological factors that I wanted to talk about when you're thinking about embodying main character energy, just so that you're aware that these are things that we have studied. So, eye contact matters. So, mutual eye contact for just 2 minutes can increase feelings of attraction and connection. That's a study that's been out for a while. It came out in 1989. Obviously, we know that. My friend Margot and I were talking about this a lot because she has a Bernese Mountain Dog, and something happens when I make eye contact with this dog, okay? He just has the most loving look, and it just makes me feel so good inside, and Margot always says, like, yep, that's the oxytocin. So I'm like, I'm sure that there's something similar exists, like, between humans. And it does, but obviously it's easier to make solid eye contact with a dog for 2 minutes than it is with another person. So I'm not challenging you to go and like stare deeply into someone's eyes like a psycho, but like I am saying, just make a concerted effort to make eye contact, even if it's just for a couple moments when you're talking to someone. I don't care who it is. Make that eye contact because that does stimulate the release of feel-good hormones, okay? So let's go. I have a lot of other statistics that I was reading about, primarily with dating things, but I think that that's something for another episode. So we can get into that later. So that's the science of attraction. I talked about that for way too long, but I do think that like knowledge is power. Obviously, I think that, and I think that it's really interesting once you know these things to kind of start recognizing it in real life. Just try it out and see how it makes you feel, okay? And this experiment of embodying main character energy, it's not as much about the people, how people receive you, but more about the way that you feel, okay? So oftentimes we place way too much of our emotional validation on what people around us are thinking of us, even if it's just like a random person sitting next to you at a coffee shop that you don't even speak to. There are so many nonverbal cues and like things that we can like place on people around us to help us feel better, like things that we kind of, I don't know, use as validation ultimately. And I think that I challenge you that instead of using your data collection, okay, I'm going to get real sciencey here. Instead of collecting your data based on how the person reacts to you, collect your data based on how you feel afterwards. Like, so let's say that you have a conversation with a girl at your cycling class, okay? First of all, good for you for initiating the conversation, but even if you didn't, try a couple of these techniques, having good posture, making eye contact, being the most interested person in the room, and then I don't care how that conversation goes, just make mental note of how you feel after that conversation. And I guarantee you that you will start seeing these glimmers of main character energy everywhere you go. And I want you to make note of that. So whenever good things happen to you, when you're out and about, talking with other people, just being out in your environment, I want you to make mental note of that. Now you might be thinking, Macy, I'm an introvert. I literally cannot talk to people to save my life. You can still embody main character energy. You do not have to be going and having these long conversations with people, okay? You can literally it could be as simple as just if you think someone is looking at you. This happens to me a lot in Pilates, okay, girl? And I was like, you know what? I want to be that girl, because when I first started I do Legree, which like if you know the difference, you're like, yeah, that's not Pilates. But if you don't, like it's basically a type of Pilates on a reformer. It's just like, it's really hard, but like I've grown to love it. When I first started doing Legree, I was like, these are the hardest classes I've ever done in my entire life. And I just felt like so discouraged. And a lot of times you go and sit in those classes and nobody's talking to each other. Nobody's like looking at each other. And I'm not saying you have to be the one to be chatty, because it's like sometimes you don't want to be that person that you're sitting next to on an airplane that always is trying to strike up a convo. But literally, if you think a girl is looking at you or something, just look over at her and smile. Like literally, that's all you need to do is just make a friendly gesture of smiling. And that is like so easy to do. And I've really started trying to do that more, just being more aware of like what's going on around me in those settings. Because I do think a lot of times when we feel uncomfortable, we can just be on our phones and instead just kind of be like, just quietly aware of what's going on. So you can still do it even if you're not an extrovert. So this is something, okay, so I have, what do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4 main points that I want to close with this episode. And they are, I've told you like little tips of how to embody main character energy, but now I want to talk more broadly about the main categories that you can tackle here. So what I've talked about so far kind of falls into the first category, which is confidence hacks. So I've talked about how you can fake it until you make it. I've talked about posture. I've talked about eye contact. I have not fully talked about having the right outfit. I kind of want to film a whole other episode on cultivating your personal style, because I really think that that's something that can super elevate your confidence in any setting. And it does not have to be that complicated. And something I've worked really hard on the past couple of years, especially since I started modeling, is like learning style tips from other girls and things that fit with my personal style, and how you can kind of build a capsule wardrobe based off of that. So I'm not going to get into the outfit too much, but I will say just try to leave the house every time, even if it's just in sweatpants, wear sweatpants that you feel confident in, okay? Wear something you feel confident in. Like right now, I am going to head to a Pilates class soon, shocker, and I'm wearing like the cutest, this matching set that I just feel so cute in, okay? And like my favorite little grip socks, and I have a good slick back pony. And something I've been doing recently is wearing my little hoop earrings to Pilates. I'm not, obviously, if I'm doing like a HIIT class or anything, or definitely like playing tennis, which is something I do a ton, I'm not going to be like wearing all these like all this jewelry because it kind of bothers me. But I know like some of like Maria Sharapova, like one of the best tennis players that has played, she's retired. She would always be wearing like the biggest jewelry. Serena Williams was known for like her accessories. So, but for me personally in a workout, I'm not always wearing the biggest hoops. But with Pilates, wearing big hoops, I don't know, girl, it just makes me feel so polished. Like there is nothing better to me than a slick back. It could be a slick back pony, a slick back bun, a slick back braid, which I've been seeing a lot recently, and a good pair of hoops. So that's all I'm going to say about the outfit. But I also want to talk about a couple of other main points. And this is something that I kind of touched on earlier, but this second point is creating a signature moment. And this is something that you make up in your head, okay? It's not like, oh, like, well, I don't know what I'm good at, okay? Like, you want to create a moment that you tell yourself, I am so good at this. So I mentioned earlier in the episode about when I was walking into a party and I didn't know a single soul. And that has become my signature moment of walking into a room where I don't know anybody. And I tell myself, I am so good at this. Like, I am so good at walking into a room and making friends with anybody and like creating conversation and creating group conversation. I am so good at that. And I definitely was not always good at that, nor do I think I am particularly now, but I tell myself that I am good at it. So that is my signature moment. So that could be considered the walk-in. You could also have, a one-liner or something that you're like, okay, that was a signature moment. And this is something that maybe you could just like make observation of and say later, like, oh, that was so signature. Or having like an unforgettable exit, like romanticize that. Like I'm telling you, like you need to romanticize these signature moments. And I know that sounds a little scary of like, okay, well, how am I supposed to romanticize my boring day? But like there are ways that you can do it. Anyways. Okay, I said there were 4 points, but I think that I'm going to save some of this content for future episodes. This is an important thing that I want to talk about is the balance. So main character versus villain energy, okay? So main character energy can easily transition into villain energy if you're not careful. You don't want to be walking into every room being like, yes, I am the hottest girl alive, which like you should, in your head, you should think that, but you really have to embody a sense of humility as well. And for me, the way I balance it is by being friendly and listening. And I think that that's something that can be really important because sometimes you can be giving off a little bit of villain energy of being like, I'm too cool to talk to you, that kind of vibe. And that is not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about main character energy, okay? Not everything is about you, babe. And I know that that's tough. That goes against everything that I've been talking about in this episode, but truly understanding like, okay, everybody is the center of their own universe and they're all living their own unique lives and they have their own problems that they're dealing with. You really got to keep that in mind so that the main character energy doesn't turn into villain energy. Not everything is about you. And sometimes that is perfectly okay. Like sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm just like the NPC. I'm the non-playable character in this scene. I'm just like, I'm just an extra in this particular moment. But, you have to think about it that way. Like what part of the movie scene am I in? But I will say when I attempt to embody main character energy, usually I try to do that in times when I'm not feeling confident. But I really think about this balance of main character versus villain in the fact that I am not trying to be like a yap fest all the time. I am really trying to develop my listening skills. Obviously, being the most interested person in the room is something that I've been working on for a few years now. It's been really, really beneficial. And just letting other people, talk about things that they're passionate about or things that they're interested in and asking follow-up questions like, oh, why do you think that's interesting? Or I don't know anything about that. Can you tell me more? It's been such a fun journey of like being in turn the main character. So that has been my take on main character energy and tackling the winter uglies. So I am so excited to talk to you guys in the next episode. This weekend, I am headed up to Vail. I'm really excited, kind of nervous. Me and the girls are going to the John Summit concert. So a few of us are going up early tomorrow and we're going to ski Vail. And I've never skied Vail before. If you are in Colorado, you know there's the whole Epic versus Icon Pass dilemma. I was an Icon girly all the way up until this year. Last year was my last year of being able to use my student my student discount. And so this year, it was like my first year being like an adult, paying for like an adult pass. So I decided, well, I'm going to try the Epic Pass because these are mountains that I haven't skied before. So I've never skied Vail before, and I'm so excited to ski the mountain. I've heard from a few of the girls that it is just their favorite. And then on Saturday, we have the John Summit concert. One of my favorite DJs, Abo, is opening. I actually think I have like more of his songs on my playlist than I do John Summit, but I am just so excited to dance. I am so excited to just have fun with my girls, enjoy the après ski vibes. I'm just like so into it. So I'm nervous because I'm fully like kind of in my grandma era where I'm like, oh, I don't like to stay up like super late, but I'm like, no, I need to embrace it because I've heard with John Summit concerts, like he doesn't start his set until midnight a lot of the times. And so I gotta be ready with my Red Bull and I'm gonna be ready to embrace it. So with that being said, I have to go, but I am so excited for next episode, and thank you so much for listening to this episode. I am really excited to see what model behavior becomes. Bye.